Did you know that African trade networks connected 3 continents long before European colonialism drew a single border on the map? Africa wasn't waiting to be discovered. It was already at the center of global commerce. If stories of African innovation and the true scope of African history fascinate you, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear changes how the ancient world looks. Here's a question worth sitting with. When you picture ancient global trade, who do you see? China? The Silk Road? But what if the highways of the ancient world also ran through Africa, across its oceans, deserts, and cities, powered by African intelligence, African courage, and African vision? From the Horn of Africa to the Swahili coast, from the forests of West Africa to the Mediterranean shores, African traders were not isolated people on a distant continent. They were architects of international commerce. They moved gold, ivory, spices, textiles, and something even more powerful, ideas. Let's begin on the East African coast, where the Indian Ocean breathed life into African civilization. Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, Sofala. These weren't quiet fishing villages. They were glittering trade cities. Stone houses, coral palaces, bustling ports where languages mixed like spices in the air. African merchants here mastered the monsoon winds, seasonal patterns that carried ships from Arabia, Persia, India, and even China to African shores, and then carried African goods back across the sea. That wasn't luck. That was science. African science. Archaeology proves it. Chinese porcelain in Kenyan ruins. Persian glass in Tanzania. African pottery found in Indian Ocean ports. These aren't coincidences. They're fingerprints of deliberate, organized African trade. Even the language tells the story. Swahili, a great African language, grew from this exchange. Bantu roots enriched with Arabic and Persian. A language born from trade, diplomacy, and cultural intelligence. Now turn west. Across the Sahara, an ocean of sand, African caravans crossed distances that would terrify modern travelers. The kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai weren't just rich in gold. They were economic engines connecting sub-Saharan Africa to Venice, Cairo, Baghdad, and beyond. African gold funded foreign empires, but it flowed through African hands first. And where did this wealth go? Look at Timbuktu. By the 14th century, it wasn't just a market town. It was a city of scholars, libraries, universities, African thinkers studying astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and law, funded by African trade. This is what commerce built, not just markets. Knowledge. Pause and consider this. How did pre-colonial African societies manage trade across thousands of miles without modern technology? They built credit systems based on trust and reputation. They standardized weights and measures. They created diplomatic protections for merchants. They engineered ships suited for monsoon seas. They trained camels to cross deadly deserts. They mapped stars, winds, and currents. This wasn't primitive trade. This was international business. Travel north to Aksum, in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. By the 1st century CE, Aksum was linking the Roman Empire, Arabia, Persia, and India. Its merchants traded ivory, gold, and frankincense. It minted its own coins, found as far as India. That's not isolation. That's global reach. Even ancient foreign guides like the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea described African ports and African rulers negotiating trade. Business between equals. Here's what matters most. Africans were not passive suppliers waiting for outsiders. They set prices. They controlled routes. They built cities. They established law and order. When Ibn Battuta traveled through Mali, he marveled at the safety of the roads. A traveler could cross vast lands without fear. That security wasn't accidental. It was governance. It was civilization. So when people say Africa was isolated, when they say history only began when Europe arrived, they ignore centuries of African globalization. Africans were already moving goods, people, languages, and ideas across continents. They were already building the interconnected world we think is modern. Colonialism didn't create African trade networks. It disrupted ones that already worked. Today, archaeologists keep finding proof. Chinese ceramics in Tanzania, African ivory in Indian temples, West African gold in European churches. Each discovery echoes what African memory has always known. We were never on the sidelines of history. We were connected. We were innovative. We were essential. This is African history, not a footnote, but a foundation. African trade networks didn't just connect Africa to the world. They helped create the world we know. If this changed how you see history, subscribe and follow. Because Africa's past isn't a story of isolation. It's a story of movement, intelligence, and global vision.